Hello, everyone in the NARUC community. As part of the summer NARUC meetings, I am thrilled to have a conversation with Brandon Presley, the president of NARUC for this year. And what a year it is.
Amen.
We can all have plenty of stories on how unusual this year and this situation is as it's ongoing. But Mr. President, can you share some of your thoughts as to your first reactions and kind of how this has played out for you over the last 4 to 5 months that we're now into the pandemic?
Well, first of all, thank you to Phil, to you, and to EEI for working with us so well during the pandemic and throughout so many issues that I think that many of us never dreamed that we would be dealing with. And NARUC's partnership with EEI has been very, very important during this period because we were able to speak with one voice on things such as moratoriums on shutoffs, sending an example of where regulators and regulated companies can work together for the public interest and find that spot in the middle of a pandemic in which we could really both put our best foot forward to protect the public health and welfare. And I just want to say thank you personally, Phil, to you and to Tom and Ivy and the crew and all the EEI members for your very hard work working with us in a cooperative way has meant a lot. You know, I told somebody I picked a heck of a year, decided to be NARUC president. And so there have been a lot of challenges that have come up. Some of the issues that were at my, really at the center of my time as NARUC president, the issues I was very concerned about, broadband access, for example, has been one that we knew it was an issue prior to the pandemic. The pandemic has shown it to us in stark and up close terms of that digital divide really existing. And so we've been able to focus on that in a proactive way, but in a reactive way, again, to cite the partnership with not just EEI, but AGA, NAWC, NRECA, all of the trade groups working together to look at things such as, you know, one issue that came up was the commercial paper industry and our work with the chairman of FERC, Neil Chatterjee, to send a letter over to the chairman of the Federal Reserve. Those are issues in which, you know, we didn't think about those in December. We didn't think about those in January, but I think we were able, working together, to have a partnership that made sure the lights stayed on, the service stayed reliable at a time in which we needed it in a way that we could have never dreamed, to not only for the convenience of electricity and utility service, but also for the life-saving capability for our hospitals, our medical professionals, our law enforcement, and those who have needed it. And so again, those issues have been really at the core of what we've tried to do, and not only being reactive, but also being proactive. I appreciate EEI's willingness to serve as a stakeholder on the emergency preparedness, readiness, and resiliency task force that I created about a month ago. And Phil, I think you're going to be their representative on there. We're pleased to have you. That task force is going to look at not only the normal, what we would call emergencies. I don't know if there's a normal emergency, but the things that we are somewhat used to: tornadoes, hurricanes, floods, ice storms. But then I created a subcommittee to COVID-19 response. The reason I did that was I've always found it very important to take lessons learned, the things in which we go through a situation and we learn that we never would have thought of before. And there are a lot of those in COVID-19 that not only regulators have learned, but industry has learned. We need to collaborate on that. We need to talk about, so that, God forbid, we have a resurgence of COVID-19 or another pandemic. At least we have sat down and put pen to paper as to the lessons in which we learned through this in a way that we would have otherwise probably have never have learned. This task force will have 15 commissioners on it, 15 members of that are stakeholders from interested groups, whether it be DOE, FEMA, EEI. We have a representative from private construction, actually a Mississippi construction company, Yates Construction, organized labor, consumer protection. We want to have a robust discussion about where do we go forward, making sure that resiliency is key. And when I say resiliency, I envision this, and I envision this task force as looking at beyond what we know now, looking at how do we harden the grid, how do we really and truly take the bold steps that regulators and industry have to do working together to make sure that we keep the power on, make sure we keep the gas flowing, the water on as we go forward. This is a part in my view. This is a national security issue, and we have got to have an all hands on deck approach. My granddaddy used to say that the best thing is a clear understanding in the beginning. And I think as we work together through this, just like we've done on cybersecurity, bringing regulators and industry together, we're able to forge a path in which there is not a necessary acrimonious type of proceeding, but we understand what needs to be done for the public interest, and we bring in everyone to the table that would have an interest. And so we're pleased to do that. Phil, you asked the question, what all has it been like? I think that from a NARUC perspective, our members have stepped up in a way that we could have never dreamed. Our commissions throughout the country and in the U.S. territories have done things and have acted in a way to protect their citizens and protect the public interest that is really laudable. That's something that should be commended. Regulators stepped in to make sure vital services were staying connected. And I do want to say to our industry participants and our industry companies, the fact that you were willing to immediately step to the bat and say, we're going to halt disconnections, and we will work that out. We will figure out a way to work that out. Many states are still working through that, but the willingness to show that we're all Americans and we're all in this together, I think has sent a really good signal from the regulatory community and from the industry that we're going to get through this together, and we're going to take these lessons learned back when we can finally get back to congregating with one another, and we're going to put them to work to make the American utility industry stronger, better, and safer than ever before.
Well, you have shown tremendous leadership under a very stressful set of circumstances, and we'll get back to your foresight on the broadband issue, and we'll talk about the task force maybe a little bit more. Greatly appreciated. It reminds me a little bit, not completely analogous, but we have the Electric Subsector Coordinating Council that's been very involved in this, and that's a private-public partnership. And in that sense, their task force, more expansive than that with other organizations, but getting people at the table with a lot of different voices or perspectives, that's how you really get to a point where you build consensus. And your point about resilience is so true, because the studies all show it. The value of electricity is so much more than you pay for it if you don't have it.
Right.
And a resilient system which has prudent investments that helps sustain the ability to deliver and consume that electricity is well worth the investment when in almost every situation, depending on different circumstances and different infrastructure.
And I know you know this, and I know your members know this, and some people would probably say that I'm being a little bit too strong in a tone when I talk about a serious national security issue. And I know that we do not look at this as outside of the threats of cybersecurity and those sort of knowns, but we would have never dreamed we were in the middle of a health pandemic, a worldwide pandemic, a health crisis that strained every part of American life. And I think that, the examples that I've heard, and I want you to talk to us in a little bit about kind of what some of your members at EEI have done, particularly in North Carolina, with the Duke Foundation and that partnership there, because I want to make sure our NARUC members get to hear about that, because I think that's another place where utilities and regulators can come together. At the end of the day, your customers are my constituents. My constituents are your customers. And if we start off from that beginning point with that understanding, we can get a lot done. It's a matter of, as you just said about the coordinating council, of getting everybody at the table. Tell the viewers about the unique partnership there in North Carolina.
Can I get to that in a moment? Because okay. I want to build on what your point about, we work together. We included our friends in the consumer advocate community on a variety of issues, because we were looking out for the customers. And yep. We had the initial moratorium that all of our member companies announced in March. And we appreciate your support and your leadership in that. And yet, every state's different, as you alluded to. The crisis, the pandemic's hitting differently in different places. And in terms of what we're seeing in terms of bad debt, some delinquency on bills, it's not the same everywhere.
Right.
And the point is that your colleagues in the NARUC community need that flexibility to deal with it, developing payment plans, figuring out what makes sense for that local or regional economy. And we still remain extremely concerned about congressional action that would extend a moratorium, tie the hands of NARUC members. Maybe it's well-intentioned, but it doesn't play out well in the real world for the sake of customers and for the sake of the regulators who have to wrestle with these issues. So we appreciate the fact that you weighed in, so did Nasuka, saying that this legislation that's been proposed, it'll actually do more harm than good. And we appreciate that. We hope that'll be, frankly, something that gets discussed a bit during the NARUC summer meetings.
I think you'll hear about that. I think that, you know, one of the points that I've made to members of Congress when I've talked about this issue, and I've tried to make this to make sure that those that are working in government relations for NARUC have made this point also. You know, we didn't have to have Congress tell us to put a moratorium on shutoffs. States did that without any prompting by the federal government because they are the closest to the people. They understand the constituency better, and they have the relationships with the regulated utilities because at the end of the day, they're the regulators. And so Congress did not have to call the Mississippi Public Service Commission and tell me to go down on a Sunday afternoon, March 14th, and vote for a 60-day suspension of disconnections. We did that on our own action. And then, as you said, Phil, I mean, I think it's well-intentioned. I really believe that. I think that the people who feel like that the moratorium should be in place federally are doing it from a good place in their heart. The fact is, states are handling this, and they're handling it in a way in which balances the interest of not only the consumers, but also how do we make sure that we are measuring twice, measuring three times on the impacts going forward. You know, I get to see the data in Mississippi, and we have fortunately been able to weather this storm financially to a certain degree, but the commission came out early and said, number one, we're going to put a regulatory accounting order in place, and we will come back and look at this to try to give some assurance that, you know, we're trying to move forward again in a manner in which is cooperative and appropriate for protecting the public interest. And then secondly, we gave out options. And when we gave the last 14-day extension, we gave options to our companies to things such as if you have a cash deposit in place and the utility itself and the customer agree that that cash deposit can be applied to a past due bill, and both parties agree, then in fact that could be done. And the utility could then, in line item, prorated, recover another deposit going forward. We wanted to make sure that the companies had the liquidity to move quick in the middle of a pandemic. At the same time, we wanted to make sure if a customer has a cash deposit in place and it can help keep their electricity on, that seemed to be a common sense move. We did not need the federal government to tell us to do that because trust me, I get the calls on my cell phone. You know, I mean, I hear from my constituents as my colleagues do around the country. And so we're committed to fighting any federal action that's unilateral, that steps in the role of where we think is appropriate for states to act, because a one-size-fits-all is not the right approach, and it would be, I think, would be detrimental, and it's just wrong-headed public policy. It's not something that we need to see, and so I've committed as president of NARUC to push back hard against that, and we've had those conversations, and we'll continue to do that because, as you point out, this is just not the right. This is not the right way to do the right thing.
Yeah, well, your example there of Mississippi shows the creativity that you could approach in dealing with this that obviously couldn't be anticipated in federal legislation. So we thank you so much for that, and we'll keep working together on that.
Absolutely,
again, really
absolutely.
For the sake of the customers out there.
Absolutely.
All right, so back to the issues of broadband and telecom and the Duke Foundation example. You pointed out before the COVID crisis how important internet connectivity was for, you gave some great examples in speeches that I've heard you give of small towns in areas that you represent, and they're being held back by the lack of that access. And I know you've been creative, and I think our member companies, such as Energy, have been creative to try and deliver, at a minimum, the middle mile. But the specific example from North Carolina was the Duke Foundation having special school buses that were wired for Wi-Fi and delivered lunches or meals to kids in a location, and that way the kids could get the food and then also connect online to do some work during the day. It's, again, a creative approach and laudable, and we have other examples as well, but it points back to your recognition of the fact that if you don't have internet connectivity, broadband, high speed, it's going to hold you back. And in many cases, it's the communities that are being held back that need it the most.
Well, I think that that's a beautiful example of really corporate leadership. I mean, it is really, at the end of the day, I know it's easy for some people, and as a regulator, I have been guilty of this myself, of at times being somewhat overly critical about the foundations and other things that are put in place to try to help in the service territory. But this is an example of where this really came together to work, and I think that is a beautiful example of it. You know, I want to be candid with you, Phil, and to all the EEI members. I think we have moved into, over the last 5 months, not only a different world in the terms of healthcare and a different world on the terms of telecommuting, but I dare say to you on this video that we have moved into a new world where electric utilities will and must play a role in broadband expansion. Electric utilities were able to get power to every house in our nation, and that ability has got to be paired up. Maybe it's partnerships, maybe it is different cooperative agreements between providers. But I am as serious about this as I have been anything. I believe our electric utilities have to be a major part of the team of getting broadband access to rural America. And I'm not just talking about our rural electric cooperatives. You point out a very good example in Mississippi, but I would go next door to the state of Alabama, where Alabama Power is working right now with actually a Mississippi broadband provider, C-Spire, a Mississippi-owned company, to try to work to wire the state of Alabama. I think this is a chance for the electric industry, again, using their expertise of delivery, using their expertise of reliability, to come in and try to find ways to work together. And I think it is a perfect space for us to begin having that conversation as we talk about smart grid investments, as we talk about grid enhancement, as we talk about smart meters and energy control. One of the things in Mississippi that's a goal of ours is that we work with our electric utilities, and we've got some bills that we feel like will pass the legislature this year, this coming session, possibly in October, in a special, in a continued session of what we have going on, that would actually take care of issues of liability on rights of way and easements, that would actually allow our for-profit investor-owned utilities, Mississippi Power and Entergy, to lease off their dark fiber to be able to bring internet service to their customers. And it has the great benefit of not only allowing that customer to stream Netflix, do telecommuting, do distance education, but it is also squarely in the interest of the other electric customers. It's squarely in the interest of the customer base as a whole, that each home have the ability to control their thermostat, to be able to have a home of the future. I represent the poorest state in the United States of America. And if we are going to pull the poor regions of this country up and be able to come out of this pandemic better, we have got to work with our investor-owned electric companies in cooperation with telecommunications providers. It is a shame and a disgrace that we have dark fiber laid throughout this nation, laid by and paid for by electric customers and electric utilities, and yet we have laws and regulations and red tape in the way that prevents our electric companies from renting off that excess space that could be of benefit to the bottom line of a customer's bill. These are benefits for everyone. And so I think that part of what, I want our task force to look at as we work in conjunction with the broadband expansion task force is, where do we go and begin cutting that red tape? Where do we go and begin identifying policies, either on a federal level or even on the state level, that need to be changed? Because I think if we look back, when you and I are old men, and we're getting close to being old now, but if we look back at this 20 years from now, we have got to turn the corner here the jury has returned a verdict on connectivity, and it is we're guilty of not leveraging every asset. And regulators have got to be open-minded. They have to be prudent. They have to protect the public interest. Electric utilities have got to be innovative, and we've got to find again that meshing of those two interests, which I think is the public interest, and work together. I think that your members are going to lead and be a part of a revolution unlike anything since we saw electricity go out to the rural homes and throughout America that none of us, maybe Tom, was around to see in the 1930s.
Well, that's where your leadership's making a difference. I mean, we've known about these issues for a while, collectively as a country, but there are some policies that just don't make sense anymore. As you noted, there are often easement issues at the state level, which have to be tackled. There's some federal issues. We look forward to working with your folks and keeping you informed about some potential language we might be working on that would, especially for our members, make it easier for the middle mile, not the end service providers so much and the front end, but the middle mile, because as you noted, that when you put in a fiber system, the incremental cost of additional fiber is very low.
Right.
So you might as well put in more than you need
Right.
if you're going to be making that investment. And policy should not hold back the ability of folks to use that, rent it out. That can be benefit to the entire customer base.
You know, one of the things we did in Mississippi, and I don't want to just talk about what we've done in Mississippi as the NARUC president, but I think it is to your point. When we adopted an integrated resource plan last year, we put specifically in that plan two provisions trying to be forward-looking, trying to look to the future, trying to look to the electric utility of the future. When we said, number one, that we would allow $10 million a year of investment into fiber optic infrastructure for the efficient, reliable operation of the electric grid. Then we added $25 million in our integrated resource plan that would deal with grid enhancements, grid modernization. So that is $35 million per year that is part of our integrated resource plan that we have said to our investor-owned utilities, go forth and get this work done. We want to have a modernized grid in the poorest state in the United States of America. We want to make sure, as you just pointed out, that if you're going to bring a fiber optic line through Smith and Jasper County, and you're doing it for the operation of your grid, it is a shame and a disgrace to pass a family's home or a family farm with excess fiber to operate an electric grid when we could be leasing off that other asset to bring that same customer of that electric utility connection to the outside world. It makes total sense. And, you know, our electric utilities record on reliability is excellent. It is beyond the pale compared to other industries. And I think the ability to work together, the ability to take that dark fiber, which is an asset, and put it to work benefits all 50 states and our territories. And it's something that, again, you and I would agree, and I don't think there's anybody in this country that would agree, that would disagree with us, that there will never come a day in which internet access is going to be less important. There's not going to come a day in which electric utilities are going to be less reliant on communication systems. That is a fact staring us in the face. The question is, as policymakers and as industry, what are we doing with those facts? Are we going to just mark time and hope for the best? And that's where I really appreciate, I remember a conversation that you and I had out in San Antonio, Texas, where we talked about, you know, how can we pull this together with our investor owners and our co-ops and regulators to say, you know what, we're all in this thing together. Let's be smart about it. And so, you know, again, thanks to you.
Well, we were looking forward to your nationwide tour to talk about this stuff, but obviously, you know, the Presley tour was going to be much anticipated, but the pandemic.
I intend to be around for a while after my NARUC presidency, so maybe I can get out and talk to some other spots.
Well, good. I mean, you're going to keep this, and we're going to help you keep this issue alive, regardless of the forum that we have to hold it in, because as you said, it's too important, and it's for people who may not have gotten it before. After 4 months of what we've gone through, just about, I think everyone gets it now. So thank you for, again, moving that issue forward in a way. And,
thank you.
So when you look around at the NARUC community, my sense is, like the rest of us, it's really responded quite impressively to the fact that we can't travel to meetings together. We can't necessarily hold public meetings the way
Right.
commissions used to. How are your colleagues holding up from your perspective?
I think they're holding up good. I mean, we have, it has been a big change. And then I think that's understating it for all of us, no matter where you are in this pandemic. One of the things that the executive committee had to make a decision on very early on was, do we in fact have a summer summit or do we not? And I felt very convicted that we continue on as best we can to do the work that NARUC has been so well known for and has been so effective at. And we tried to adjust on the field as best we could. And so once we found the time to make strategic decisions based upon the advice of the governor of Massachusetts and the mayor of Boston and the health officials in Massachusetts, we said, okay, that's off the table. What can we do? And then the question, or do you cancel the meeting or do you come up with a hybrid approach? And I felt very, as I said, convicted, and I think our executive committee did too, that we not just lay down, that we retool and we find a way in which to bring this interaction together as best we could. And we've hit over 715 registrants already, which is amazing, seeing that, all that we've had to shift around. And so we're going to get through it. And I think that it's important for consumers, for industry, for consumer advocates, and the whole regulatory community to see that, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We're going to not only do our work, but we're also going to deliver the great content that NARUC does. And Phil, this, with the issues that we have on the table, with the issues that are out there, whether it be a federal moratorium, whether it be issues in telecom, whether it be the issues of natural gas expansion and pipeline safety, those aren't going away. And so we have a duty to continue that discussion and continue the work. And so I think they've responded very, very well, and it's been a unique challenge.
Well, you clearly made the right call. And as you know, we had a bit of a trial run, thanks to Michelle Malloy,
Yep.
by having the virtual NARUC meeting a few weeks ago with the backgrounds of the homestead,
Yep.
even though none of us were actually there. And I was privileged to be on a panel with some colleagues from other industries, and notably former president of NARUC, Tony Clark, pointed out that he put a white paper out and kind of argued, I think, a very rational position, which is that we're in the middle of this now, but it does give members of NARUC a chance to perhaps sit back, catch their breath, and maybe rethink some approaches toward rate structures, given what we've seen with an unexpected event that's impacted demand, more so on the commercial and industrial side. But as you know, people are changing their habits at home now that they're working at home, so it's reflective of that. And I've always felt like there's some cost causation issues that we've kind of historically lined up a lot of costs of the grid onto the consumption side. And that creates some problems when suddenly consumption goes down. And so I really commend Tony for pushing the idea that now's a good time for commissions to say, maybe we really want to do it a little bit differently, or maybe we don't want to do it a lot differently, or open up some more options.
Yeah.
Maybe it's decoupling or something along those lines. Curious your reaction to that.
No, I think Tony's right. I mean, one of the people that I've got a picture of hanging in my office is former Secretary of Defense Don Rumsfeld, who famously said in another context, there are known knowns. There are things we know. There are known unknowns. Those are the things that we know we do not know. And then there are unknown unknowns. And I think that's where we are. We're there between known unknowns and unknown unknowns. And we've got to have smart minds like Tony Clark. We've got to have smart minds throughout industry, throughout consumer protection, throughout industry groups, and throughout different stakeholders who have maybe sometimes divergent interests, but can come together. We've seen that. We have seen that. We've seen groups come together over the last couple of months that you would always see on the other side of a table litigating. But we need the smartest people in the room. We need the best ideas. We cannot take 2019 thinking and go forward. We've got to take 2020 thinking and understand what it is that we have faced, understand the pitfalls we've avoided, the ones we've fallen in, how we got out of them. And I think that's one of the things I hope that our task force, bringing stakeholders in, I think this may be, Phil, you've been around longer than I have, but I think this may be the first time that NARUC has actually designated stakeholders to come in to actually help as we go forward with the task force. And I think that this is a time in which, that's called for and something that's going to be good.
Well, we're thrilled to be part of it and honored, because by having that large stakeholder table, it's not too large, you get a variety of views to hopefully get to a consensus with your leadership that again, things have changed. And the term 2020 vision is going to mean something a whole lot different in the future than we thought it did in the past.
That's right.
Because of what we're dealing with. And again, we don't know exactly how this is going to play out. We're one day closer each day.
We're one day closer each day.
Where the end to this period might be.
Right. That's
so,
right.
Again, we're just thrilled that you have been doing an outstanding job to begin with. But then when you faced this incredible set of challenges that you've just delivered, you've stayed so consistent in your messages about doing what's best for the customers. And so we appreciate that.
And I will say to that, and I want to say thank you again to EEI. Doing what's best to the customers is not an exclusive term. That is a term that means that industry and regulators work together. And I think that you all have shown that leadership. And I personally, not as NARUC president, I personally appreciate that good working relationship, realizing clearly regulators have a job to do, and those sometimes we agree, sometimes we don't agree. But we've had an all hands on deck approach to this, and then EEI has been a leader. You personally, Phil, have, and Tom and others. And so I want to say thank you again, and it's been good to be with you today.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, and who knows what's going to happen, but I grew up in the state of Washington. I hope we can all meet in Seattle, and we'll see.
Yep. Fingers crossed.
All right. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Phil. Good to see you, man.
Likewise.